The idea of building an interstate or highway through or past a city is a complicated one, with several stakeholders at play. First, you need to worry about the people that may be in the possible path of your freeway, with the right-of-way you'd have to acquire. A lot of the time, it's easier to build these freeways around the city as to disturb the built environment as little as possible. So you give it some space, but how does that affect the downtown? Diverting traffic to a large highway outside of the city brings the economy off of the main street, with new malls and chain restaurants popping up along exits serving similar purposes. So residents and business owners in the central business district are forced to fight back. This is an age-old story seen throughout the country as new interstates were built and interacted with cities, and it led to a problem-solving process that resulted in a highway type that you might not notice, but serves an important purpose to cities across America. So today I'm going to talk about business routes, why they exist, what they do, and what they don't do. Before that though, please consider subscribing to the channel. We make geography content like this every week, so if you enjoy this video, click the subscribe button because it's super easy for you and it helps me out a ton. Thank you. So let's take a step back and talk about the basics of a business route. And even though you might know what it is already, I promise you things will get interesting later. So simply, a business route is a special route branching off of a parent highway that is meant to connect into the downtown or a main business district of a city. This can include city centers, historic districts, or just any inner city area, and commonly they're along the former routing of the highway. See, back in 1964, 9 years after the creation of the interstate system, it was around the peak of these new freeways being built, whether that be an official interstate or a state or U.S. highway. These routes would bypass cities, cutting off access to the downtown, and this was a big problem, since residents of these cities watched the movie Cars and didn't want to see the same thing happen to them. So the government was forced to find a way to appease the cities, and they came to the conclusion that creating a new highway designation called a business route that would connect into these downtown businesses was the way to go. It made cities happy, and all the Federal Highway Administration needed to do was place some signs down. Because in actuality, these business routes could just be placed along what used to be the main arterial route, and there was no real change in the development process. This idea leads us to the geography of our hidden business routes, which usually aren't even listed on maps, like Business 5 in Redding, California, that simply goes by State Route 273. So, business routes are most common in the western U.S., and they're also found in the Midwest states like Wisconsin and Michigan. And there's a good reason for this that comes from these states' planning process. See, in the East, where roads were older and freeways were built earlier on, interstates and major highways weren't built directly along the former route, instead being built either earlier on, like the Pennsylvania Turnpike, or getting a brand new route, making it very easy to designate the old route as just a local road or even a frontage road if they were that close. But in the West and Midwest, where we see it the most, the design tactic was to build the new highway usually directly over the old highway. There was an exception to this though, because at cities and towns, the interstate would always bypass, taking a turn right around the downtown. Which meant that now the old highway was sitting there, and it was really easy to just connect it right up to the interstate. So 9 times out of 10, our lazy planners took that easy option, thus creating business routes. Now this begs an incredibly important question though, since these routes weren't actually really designated to serve the downtown, and it sort of just ended up that way, with the Federal Highway Administration just designating them to appease the big complainers. Do business routes actually help businesses? Well, let's look at a few cases to find out. Let's start with Business 36 in Clarence, Missouri, a 1.65 mile route with 2 big problems. Problem 1, it doesn't go through the city's small downtown, which looks like it honestly got hit pretty hard by the massive bypass around it, and could have used some traffic. Problem 2, on the west side of the business route, it doesn't even connect back up to US 36. Instead, it's an abandoned dead-end road, 180 feet from having a perfectly good connection. And it's laziness like this that shows you the real intent was not to help the businesses of downtown Clarence. Another example is Business Loop I-80 through Sacramento, California, which is a fully limited access highway and has been since its designation. Basically, this used to be I-80, and the freeway ran through Sacramento and was grandfathered into the system after pre-existing for quite some time. And the north portion that is now I-80 was called I-880. Since this portion was grandfathered in, though, they had to make some changes for it to be up to interstate standards, something they were too lazy to do, which ends up being a trend for this topic. This meant it could no longer be I-80, and they had to switch the designation to the north. So since it was the same process of switching a designation out of the downtown, they used the business route designation on our current highway here. Now, I explained to you how business routes are supposed to work, and this is not it. Yet it exists, and it's not the only one. My favorite business loop in the world is Business 85 in Spartanburg, South Carolina, an 8.7-mile freeway that is just an amazingly chaotic area for transportation. It's on the former routing of I-85 through the city, but they built a new bypass around the district to help alleviate traffic and allow for easier upgrades. This leads to my first point, which is that they only built it a mile farther out. I mean, what happened to go big or go home? If they were going to spend millions of dollars on a massive freeway project and bypass an area that's already out of the city, they might as well have put it farther outside the city. Also, to my second point, the building of the new freeway leads to new development along that route, with an example being the new Comfort Inn, Denny's, and suburban development at Exit 75. This means traffic is going to come to that new bypass anyways. But after they built the new I-85, they wanted to designate the old one as I-585, although they chose not to because it cost too much and they were lazy. Carrying on, they instead compromised by designating it as Business 85. Now, I don't know if you're seeing the same map I am, but this is nowhere near downtown Spartanburg at all. Sadly, yet again, it just doesn't really serve the purpose it was meant to. Also, is this an 8-directional traffic circle interchange in a highly suburban commercial district? Mad respect for South Carolina here, I didn't know they were like that. Also, just in the same area, there's I-585, which is a short, strange-looking interstate that doesn't even connect back up to I-85, instead going slightly past Business 85. And then on the other end, it doesn't even stretch all the way to downtown Spartanburg. It's another strange situation. I don't really know what's going on in Spartanburg, honestly. But yeah, thus far in my overview of business routes, there's been a lot of negativity. But the concept is not all bad, with a lot of important uses. First of all, obviously they provide a vital connection into downtown areas, which drivers can use if they're looking for services that can be provided by small towns. The issue of being bypassed is something that can have severe impacts on these areas, and in a lot of cases, there technically isn't much of anything they can do about it. So having at least some sort of designation or effort being made to preserve the economy can be super helpful, making sure they aren't totally disconnected from the highway or interstate. Next, they can help preserve historic highways or districts, with an example being Route 66, which takes the form of a business route on several occasions, like let's say Winslow, New Mexico, which is a perfect example of what these business routes are meant to do. I also want to point out it's a great way to experience a city in a slower local way, which can be helpful on trips in interesting areas, especially for the older generations that aren't trying to live life in the fast lane. Finally, they can be really helpful in the event of an emergency accident or just construction that requires a closure of the freeway. A business route is already set up to bring traffic through the city on the same general routing, unless you're Clarence, Missouri, I guess. So what do you think of business routes? It's absolutely a good concept on the surface, but it's long been hidden and ignored in planning processes, being totally misused in a lot of cases. In a time period where the economy is shifting away from a lot of these small towns, business routes have become even more important, which is why some sort of effort towards returning them to their original purpose and accomplishing that purpose could be extremely helpful. Thanks for watching. Thank you to the members this week: Jameson Headley, Colonel Potter, Eric Hare, James Cermak, Sergey C17, Cedric Zhang, Jerome McCall, The Baked Fruit, Andres Quintero, Jesse Cook, Lefty Shkurs, J.L. Enrigo, The Autistic City Silence Fan, Richard Law, Jake Host, Alexander Lichko, Lauren Halliday, The Road Dude, Charles Watson, Aiden Kyle, Somnam Woods, The Happy Hodag, Reginald Wilkerson, Grant Dickerson, Julius Lantry, Midwest Railfan, D.S., Richard Horwell, McCaffner, D. Stephen Phillips, Big Pasty, C.J. Brick, Resident Contrarian, House of the Wolf, Bunny, Brock Sanders, Stephen Priestman, S.B. Wilder, Florida Jake, Alex Williams, Makita Martinoff, Kurt Ainsley, KMS162, Bryson, Rosebud 4, Darkbird, Wolfing73, Snyderschwein, Benjamin Writings, and Ryan Devins. As always, I appreciate you guys more than anything. You've done so much for the channel. If you want to become a member, the link is down in the description below. All this money goes into my savings, so if you appreciate the content and you want to help me out in a way, this is how you can do that. I promise it'll all go to a good cause. Thank you.